Nice to everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes for people to join, but we'll be starting very shortly. Right, so just give it another minute. Right. Should we get going and then people can join as we're working our way through. So yeah, also everyone. My name's Dr. Daniel Jones. I'm the Deputy Chair for Welsh Resident Doctors Committee, looking after terms and conditions. So thank you very much for coming to this GP registrar specific webinar tonight. And some of you have been able to pre-submit questions and the like, and just continue to use the Q&A throughout the talk as well. And the way we're running it as a webinar will be the main mechanism. We will try and get to everyone's questions, but even if we don't, then we will go away, write up the answers and post them in retrospect and everything. Right, so if I just hand over to Thomas, and if you just want to introduce yourself and start the talk, if that's right.
Lovely, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us and giving up an hour of your Monday nights. As Dan said, I'm Thomas Grother. I'm a GP ST2 based in the Glamorgan Valley scheme, and we'll take you through the next couple of slides, essentially telling you guys how we've ended up here as BMA Cymru Wales with a contract negotiation. For those of you who have worked in Wales for several years, you may have been aware that we had a proposed contract reform in October of 2022. This was after several years of negotiations with the government and employers. That contract, reformed contract, was rejected by membership, and during that time, up until January 2024, we worked on a full pay restoration campaign. The unity of our profession here in Wales resulted in a 12.4% pay award in June of 2024 that we put to all of us as membership, which was accepted. As part of that offer, there was an agreement that we would re-enter into negotiations on a contract, a proposed contract. We've worked with BMA members in Cardiff with engagement events right across Wales, and we've been able to get the voices of GP registrars as well as colleagues in other community professions and in hospitals to work out what is important to us as a collective. And we have then gone into negotiations in March of this year. Members from your WRDC put themselves forward as negotiators. There was a comprehensive assessment and interview process to become negotiators on behalf of resident doctors in Wales. Those negotiations concluded in July of this year, and the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care then approved that new revised proposed contract, which is why we are here tonight to discuss it. So we'll cover tonight the main changes as part of the contract. Just before we get into that, I think it is important that we have a look at the full pay restoration journey that we've had here in Wales. As you can see, we hit quite, hit the low point in 22-23, which is where the pay restoration campaign came to life, really. Since then, we have worked back towards restored pay. This contract will give additional investment into the pay wrapper for Welsh residents, which will take us closer towards restoration. But I will pass on to Dan now to potentially explain that a little bit better, but also go through the important elements of the contract.
Sure, diolch, Thomas. Yeah, in terms of this particular slide, so we came into the current pay round with about 20.8% still down on 2008 levels as measured by RPI. And the awards that we currently have got and has already been paid out was worth an additional 5.4% on average. So that took us to about 19.1 once you accounted for inflation. This is an extra 4%, this package as a whole. On top of that, that's investment in the resident doctor workforce, largely in pay. And that is why you've got that orange line there that basically shows that we would be getting up to 16.1% left in terms of our pay restoration journey. So a bit of further progress again, getting back to a level of pay that we've not seen for a decade, pretty much. And within this context as well, there will be another pay award in April, and that will be applied to the prospective contract as well as the 2002 contract if members do vote yes and both of them come in. So just say a lot of the pay figures we'll talk about tonight will be updated effectively in April, and we remain committed to pay restoration. We are already starting to think about and make plans for the next pay round. And again, if there's not an offer next year that's not good enough, then we are very prepared to take action on it, regardless of what happens with this contract. I'm just going to take control now. Yeah, that's working. So the contract has a very different pay system, and that is quite different whether you are a GP registrar working in hospital in the initial bit of training or whether you're in practice. And we'll talk about each of those in turn, but essentially just think of it as adding up different components. So the first bit is your basic pay. And here we've got the pay scale for the current 2002 contract, and then we've got the proposed pay scale for this new one. And you can obviously the main bit that is relevant is going to be that registrar post F2 pay scale point. But you can see that broadly what has happened is that the pay scale has been consolidated into a fewer set of points, and in that registrar section, instead of progressing with every year of service or every year of incremental credit, you now progress with every 2 years worth of incremental credit or years in service. And the reason for the consolidation of those pay points is generally to allow us to front load the pay structure and things, and one of the other consequences in terms of the additional investment has generally been putting more money into basic pay. So this is the pay that you get for your nominal 40-hour working week. It's pensionable, so getting higher basic pay is good for your pension earnings later on, and because we are on a career average earnings pension scheme. And you can see broadly here that in basic pay terms, the F1 and F2 points are higher than the highest corresponding points on the 2002, and generally all of the pay points on the registrar scale are higher than the highest equivalent going across. The only thing and caveat to add in this is that as part of the negotiations and compromising, it was agreed that there would be a gateway between the second and the third pay point there. That's why the shading is different. And essentially to access that higher pay point at that point, you would need to have the usual 4 years of incremental credit or years in service, and at least 2 of those would need to be in a formal training program, or equivalent. And in terms of what that equivalent looks like, there are criteria set out in the framework agreement, but broadly a substantive clinical fellow year or substantive post abroad, those kind of thing, or going off to study or do some research, those kind of things would generally help you count it as equivalent. If it doesn't get counted as equivalent, then it gets counted for that pay point purpose. It gets counted as a half rate, similar to how locum time and the like gets counted now. And if once you're through that pay progression gateway, you would catch up on your pay as well. Not expecting too many people to be hit by it, and as I say, their pay will catch up once they're through it. And again, just to reassure people that if you are LTFT, then you progress by calendar year, so your pay will not be held up under this system as it would be under a grade-based system. And if you go out of program for statutory leave, such as maternity, or you take an out of program experience, or you spend a couple of years out of training, all of this can be counted as incremental credit, pretty much exactly the same as it currently does. And then another quick thing in terms of our system is just when it comes to working less than full time, it pretty much will be pro rata for yourselves as GP registrars unless you're doing out of hours commitments. But it is just to say that it is the average total hours you do per week as a percentage of the 40-hour working week, and then you times that by the pay point, and that gives you your annual basic pay figure. So again, you end up with a lot more pay in basic pay and therefore pensionable pay relative to the current 2002 contract. Additional hours get paid if you're full time. They'll get paid for every additional hour you do over the 40-hour working week mark, and so that will be relevant to GP registrars who are doing out of hours commitments. I know that under the standard that you do, it's not many additional hours, but it is just to say that those will be captured and they get paid at 1/40th of the weekly salary. So again, that kind of, if you do 42 hours of the average total hours a week, then it'll be 42 divided by 40 times the pay point, and that'll give you your annual base. That'll give you an annual pay figure. So that's your additional hours as a top up, and then you will get another top up for any hours that you do outside of playing time as well. So essentially you get a little bonus top up, and that is at being paid at 1.5 times the rate. And the playing time definition has stayed the same as it currently is on the 2002 contract. So Monday to Friday, 7 to 7. Any hours worked outside of this get counted as unsocial, and they attract this bonus payment, which you'll get on top of your basic pay and any additional hours pay. And then in the event that you are working a night shift or disco shift, some of these shifts that start at a certain point and then finish in hours, all of those hours get counted as unsocial. And the main difference between the plain time definitions currently is that under the 2002 contract, bank holidays were considered plain time in the day. We've now managed to get them exempt and stuff from there. And then the last thing is just the GP pay premium. So that is relevant to yourselves. This will be paid out when you are based in practice. So effectively, it replaces the 45% banding you're getting. It's set as a percentage of a fixed pay point. The main reason for that is it ensures that it gets uplifted every year with your normal pay. Having it as a fixed value, unless it is also uplifted with pay, can lead to pay erosion, as been seen in England. So it's just to say that this will continue to get uplifted each year. And there were a couple of ways you could do this, and comparing this to banding, for example, this is a fixed percentage. This is a percentage of a fixed pay point rather than following the pay point that you're on. The main reason that it has been done that way is essentially the front loading concept I was talking about earlier. So by having it fixed at this point, the percentage amount can be higher and it means that you get more from this premium earlier on in your career, and that is good in terms of your career average pension earnings. And again, arguably, you want more of your career earnings when you are on relatively lower incomes, because you're lower down the pay scale earlier on in your career. Whereas again, getting high premier or banding when you're further up the pay scale, again, useful, but not may not be as useful in that context, considering your relative income amounts. So we can talk about it a bit later in a bit more depth, but just to flag as to how that premium will work, and some of the principles behind it. And again, much like GP banding, currently this would be paid out when you are in practice. And yeah, this is just restating what some of what I've said in terms of that. The reason we've done it this way is to front load it, so that GP registrars who are earlier on in their careers get higher career average earnings and get more of that money coming through. We'll talk about if you're currently on the 2002 contract and your circumstances, if you're already high up the pay scale, when we talk about transition. But for people coming behind you, joining onto this contract, again, they will really benefit from that front loading. And we've got it specifically into the framework agreement that the reason for this pay premium is to reflect the different nature of work in general practice. It is not a recruitment premium. It's not something that will go away because GP registrar programs are oversubscribed. So it's not about that at all, or hard to fill. And it is not linked to GP out of hours rota participation as well. So you'll get this regardless of whether you participate in the out of hours rota. And if you do participate in the out of hours rota, you will get additional pay on top of that. The other thing in terms of pay system that's worth flagging is the introduction of overtime reporting, and that will be for anything, anytime that you are not rostered to do. And we know that this can be quite a significant thing for GP registrars, because very often your day will stretch beyond the typical 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 that you might end up working. And you will be able to electronically claim this, kind of analogous to an expenses system. This is something that other NHS staff groups already do. There will not be supervisor involvement or practice involvement, and you won't require any electronic proof. So it will be analogous to claiming an expense, so long as you're able to give the assurance that you actually work the time, much like you would when you claiming an expense. Then you'll be fine, and it will get paid out in the next payroll cycle. And there will be an introduction of exception reporting, which we'll talk about in a bit, but it is just say that this is completely separate to that exception reporting system. And this will come in regardless of the contract type you are on. So essentially, even if you remain on the 2002 contract, if this proposed one comes in, then that contract will be amended to replace rota monitoring with this overtime reporting system instead. We thought it would be good to do some pay examples, just because moving to an hours-based pay system does introduce is very different to what people have been used to compared to banding. So the first one that we had was just a GP registrar, full-time, working, having gone through conventionally, and participating in the out of hours rota, which in this particular instance we've gone with the typical amount of level working to do. So we can see that on the 2002 contract, on the relevant pay point with the 45% GP banding, this person ends up on that. On the proposed contract, they will get their basic pay, which is the 62,000. They'll then get their additional hours and their out of hours work top ups from the out of hours participation. So that's where those next two amounts come in. And then they get the full GP pay premium because they're based in practice. And again, if they were to work any overtime, effectively, they get that on top of what you're seeing there. So you can see that there's quite a stark difference there, but it's mainly just to illustrate how the pay works. And then in terms of LTFT percentage, so with the 2002 contract, you typically go into an F6 band when you're a GP registrar. It is quite similar to prorating if you're on 60%. So that's that pay point times the 0.6 times the 45% GP banding. And then on the 2026 contract, the way we worked it out once we took the relevant contribution to the out of hours rota is as you're seeing there. So 25 total hours per week. So they're standard pro rata 3 days a week, which would be about 24, and then an average hour of out of hours a week across the whole across the length of the rota, and that always being unsocial. So then they get that 25 over 40 times the pay points, which is what that 38,750 figure coming up is. And I hope you can see there that that is a much higher basic pay figure than 60% of 52,000. So just to show that normally when you're LTFT, you can take quite a hit on your pension earnings. And one of the advantages of the new pay system is to really to help mitigate that quite a bit by ensuring that more of your pay is in basic. And then the 775 is just the unsocial hours bonus. And then the GP premium is prorated depending on your LTFT percentage. So 60% of 16,500 gets you 9,900. And again, you can see that there's a significant difference here. We did also want to show some pay journeys as well, and there will be detailed pay journeys coming out on the BMA web pages within the next couple of weeks before any voting starts. But this is a very conventional one, and this is someone who works a general medical rota in their GPST 1 year 1A banding, and you can see what their rota pattern looks like there. And then they are in practice. And just for ease of calculation, we haven't accounted for out of hours in this. So if they did any out of hours in their second or third year, you can see that they'd be earning a bit more. There's front loading in the contract, so you can see there's a particularly big difference in that GPST 1 year. The contract, because it's hours based, also pays out quite a lot for very intense rotas. But you can see that generally year by year, it's either comparable or slightly better. And then across the training program length, there's a positive difference as well. And then we wanted to do a LTFT one that had some timeouts in it as well. So you obviously get that GPST 1 year, and we've kept that the same. But in this particular instance, we said after the GPST 2 year that this person goes off for 12 months of statutory leave. We've not put in maternity pay calculations or anything like that in this context, but again, it would probably be comparable under the two. And then just showing for the next pay points, again, the different pay systems. You can see that there's one where it's slightly lower, and that is because that person happens to be between pay points of this one. That year of statutory leave does progress you under both pay scales, and then you can see that once that person hits the next pay scale point, that they've caught up again. So it's roughly comparable at that point, and then you can see in the totals again there's a positive difference there. And then we're just going into the non-pay aspects now. So there's safety and training first. So one aspect is the introduction of job planning. And so this will introduce what your typical working week looks like. And it will also define a lot of other elements in terms of your training objectives, any educational development time that you get. We can see the rough timelines here. And the critical thing with the introduction of this contract is you will get all of this, and there are fines for the employer if none of these pay deadlines are not met. The specific bonus for the GP registrars with this contract was the incorporation of COGPED. So I'm just going to hand over to Thomas just to talk about that briefly, and then I'll resume.
Lovely, thank you. So on a UK level, the GP Registrar Committee have worked on with NHS employers to get the COGPED guidance in place. And whilst this is something that is recommended to be used in practice in Wales, so when you're in a GP rotation, it is guidance and isn't contractually, employers and your GP practices aren't obligated to use the COGPED guidance. So this clearly states it is available on the BMA website, but that you have your 7 sessions of clinical activity, a session being specifically 4 hours in length, alongside your 8 hours of structured activity and your 4 hours of SDL. If a session goes above 4 hours, then there is the need then to look at reducing hours elsewhere, or that being paid as overtime. So this clearly states that GP registrar activity is 40 hours.
Great, thanks, Tom. And yeah, and that will be specifically contractualized. There are, for again, it's probably more relevant to if you are if you're doing it in GPST1 or potentially 2, and if you're still doing hospital work. But it is just to say that there's a whole range of working hours limits, most of which are in the Fatigue and Facility Charter already, but they will now be contractualized, and there will be a force to them. So we picked out some of the salient examples there, and there's a lot more detail on the website, but I appreciate it may not be 100% relevant if you're working in practice only. Leave is much the same as it is now, so 28 days when you first start, and then after you've got 5 years of service, or you're on the third incremental point equivalent of the registrar pay scale, you get an additional 5 days of annual leave. These are full-time equivalent, and by realigning this with the NHS handbook, we've also managed to secure a number of other beneficial aspects to leave. So things like compassionate leave, shared parental leave, leave for life-changing events, all of that will come in. And there will be an obligation on an employer to respond positively to leave requests made 6 weeks or more in advance, and the employer will have to give you the facility to request leave in advance. So even if you are rotating and you're starting somewhere completely different, there must be an ability for you to claim leave before you start. And again, it may be only relevant at certain points of your GP registrar journey, but there will be an end to fixed leave patterns as well. Yeah, so we talked about there will be exception reporting introduced as a result of the proposed contract. The key thing is that this is about safety and training. It's not about pay or unpaid overtime or anything like that. So this is about if you get if you see a safety concern, if the staffing level is not appropriate, if you were meant to have teaching and you miss it, or there's some other kind of missed training opportunity, if you don't get your educational and development time entitlements, then all of this can potentially be exception reported. It is between yourself, a guardian of safe working, and your educational supervisor. So again, not necessarily your direct supervisor where the breach occurred. And you can get compensated with additional education and development time. There's a discretionary ability to issue fines by the guardian if the circumstances permit. So they've investigated, things haven't got better, there's still a lot of exception reports coming in, for example, and it can also cause job plans to be reviewed. And similarly, if you're not meeting your job plan, then you always have the ability to appeal it. So it is just to say that there will be an exception reporting system introduced, but hopefully it avoids some of the cultural issues that we saw in England, because there isn't direct supervisor involvement and it is separate to payment and overtime and the like. And here some examples of things that could be exception reported, but this is not an exhaustive list. And then I just quickly wanted to talk about the Guardian of Safe and Flexible Working and what this might look like for GP registrars. So in the framework agreement, we've already agreed prospective language around there being a Guardian of Safe and Flexible Working in the lead employer that effectively covers all the GP registrars. That'll have to be an independent senior doctor, would anticipate it being a GP. And their role will be to monitor overtime and exception reporting that comes in from various GP registrars. They're also there to promote flexible working entitlements and training. And again, we would anticipate that they would convene an all Wales GP registrar forum. And so this would be a regular event chaired by the Guardian. Your BMA reps would be coming along as well. And it would be a chance for you to raise any issues you have either with your host employer if it may be appropriate, or with your employment lead employer in general and your training. And if there is any fine money raised by the Guardian from exception reports or the like, then that forum will also have an ability to decide how that fine money is spent. And what it gets spent on, but generally would be things like well-being and training. In terms of the exact mechanics and financial flows, that is still something that we need to properly work with employers through. I've given you a rough outline of how this will work there, but there will be a lot more detail coming before any proposed contract will come in. And if the contract is accepted, then we'll have a whole work stream on GP registrar overtime and exception reporting. We'll probably reach out and try and engage you a bit more to get your thoughts on what would work and what wouldn't work. And then hopefully we're able to build a good functional system that's ready to go in August 2026. And that does take me to transitional arrangements. So if this comes in, then new starters would from August 2026 would be on the proposed contract. That will be new entries, so they may not necessarily be coming into practice straight away. And certain other groups will be being transferred over. Again, when we say unbanded specialties and rotas here, we do that specifically to mean secondary care or other community specialties that mainly do a normal working week. That wouldn't be GP registrars necessarily. And from August 2027, and this would probably be where GP registrars would come in, but that's when there will start to be transfer of everyone else. And for people in run-through training program, such as yourselves, this will be voluntary. And you'll be able to move over at a moment of your choosing if you so want to. If you're not starting on the contract, or if you don't take up that voluntary offer, then you will just remain on the 2002 contract, and you'll continue to increment annually up that pay scale, and the 2002 contract will continue to get annual pay uplifts awarded to it. So it won't be a static process. You'll stay on 2002, but your pay will still continue to go up. It's just you may not have some of the other non-pay benefits that the new contract has. Obviously, if you can voluntarily transfer over whenever you want within that year, and then the expectation is that by August 2028, that most people will have transferred over, unless they're within 12 months of CCT anyway, or there are exceptional criteria, which we still need to clarify and discuss with employers what exactly those will be. For most rotas, we're anticipating that the pay will either be comparable or it will be higher on the proposed contract. But some of the banding system scenarios, less so for GP registrars, it must be said, but some of the banding system scenarios mean that certain rotas or certain careers, particularly people who are at the very top end of the pay scale, they may end up on slightly less pay if they were to transfer contract immediately and to move on to that new pay scale. That's why we have got the prolonged transition where you remain on 2002 and you've got a voluntary option to transfer over. And at the point you transfer, you will get a cash floor pay protection based upon your total salary. So that's basic and banding. Prior to the day on the day prior to your transfer, and your pay cannot drop below that level, and then that cash floor will stick with you until you drop. Sorry, that cash flow will stick with you until you would earn more money on the new contract, and then the new contract would take over. And then there are some other elements. So the first, beyond the contract itself, so there will be study leave changes. So some clarifications around how you can use your private study days, increasing the study budget cap to 1,000, and then getting that and all the relocation budgets uplifted by inflation starting from next year, and all of this stuff would come in as soon as it can. So you would start to see some benefits before August 2026, and infinite rollover study leave budget. So it won't cap out at 1,200. You'll continue to roll over any leftover money, and the course expenses will be reimbursed at the time that you pay out whatever the expense is, rather than having to wait for the event itself to pass. And this was primarily about getting quick changes that wouldn't be too complicated and would benefit doctors sooner rather than later. We've done a whole exercise with HIW, Welsh Government and employers around what we want the study budget to look like in future. And it is just to ensure that we don't think that £1,000 is good enough as a cap, but eventually we want to get to a system where the funding is centralised. All of your mandatory courses that you need to do are prepaid and pre-booked for you, and therefore there's automatic approval. And then if there's any study budget or stuff, it will be more of a personal study budget that is there for you to use for discretionary opportunities. So that is the direction we hope we go in, but getting the cap up higher was a short-term benefit that we thought would be useful for doctors in the meantime. We're also really cognizant of unemployment and underemployment, and there has been significant training post expansion already recommended by HOW following a lot of our lobbying. If this deal is accepted, then one of the things that will flow out would be setting up a working group to go through all of this properly with ourselves, employers, Welsh Government and HIW, and to address the bottlenecks that it has finally been acknowledged do exist. And obviously for yourselves as GP registrars, I know that one of your biggest concerns right now is post-CCT employment, and sessional underemployment is a huge issue across the UK, and that would definitely be within scope of this. So we would be on our end, we would be looking to if there's what kind of things we could do around things like grace periods, etc., to help yourselves, and obviously our colleagues in the GP branch are continuing to push for further investment in the GMS contract so that they can hire more sessional GPs and give out more sessions. And and then one other bonus that we had as well was around the travel expenses. So this is a bit more niche, but obviously with your home visits, etc., is quite relevant to GP registrars. And that is essentially taking it from the Whitley Council rules as it currently is, which are quite niche and difficult to work up, to the NHS handbook. So that will be a simpler set of expenses, and the standard mileage rate will be slightly higher than the one that a lot of you will currently be getting. So again, it's a little bit of a better travel expense system for yourselves. Yeah, we did want to be frank about concessions and stuff we had to make. So both because of the pay restoration journey, but also around some of the pay changes that we see with the systems that we've done. We called for an additional 4%. Getting more than that would have been helpful in several aspects. And we did that with a credible threat of industrial action. This is particularly around the time of the GDRB award. Unfortunately, those calls were rejected. 4% was the absolute limit that we could get. And at least in my opinion, to get more than that 4% would require actual industrial action. We do have a 2002 rate card for locum rates. We've seen quite a standard thing in pay offers that is to be withdrawn. Here, we agree to withdraw it and enter into talks with employers around a potential All Wales rate card jointly agreed between the BMA and employers. If those talks don't go anywhere, or if we end up back into disputes, then we are able to reintroduce the rate card. I've talked about the pay progression gateway already, so I won't dwell on that. The transition was another aspect, so mainly for flexibility, as well as some of the career planning and stuff that some people have done. We did want there to be a longer period where people could remain on the 2002 contract if that's what they wanted. Initially, employers wanted to not run two contracts at all at the same time. And this 2028 mark is essentially a compromise position. But in an ideal world, we would have wanted it longer. And then again, this may not be so relevant for yourselves, but in the 2002 contract, there are some basic pay protection provisions for people returning from a career grade. So, for example, a SAS doctor, and that has gone, but that was part of a pitch of retaining years in service pay progression. So all that will happen in these instances is, rather than relying on the basic pay protection, they will be able to claim all of their post-foundation year work, which will normally be quite a lot as a career grade, and therefore they'll just be able to start very high up on the pay scale when they start their relevant training program. So we're not anticipating this to be a major problem. So the next steps quickly. So the online referendum will run from the 24th to the 15th of December. It will be all resident doctors working in Wales, including yourselves, the GP registrars, and other groups that are relevant, like locally employed doctors on resident doctor contract mirror versions or equivalent, as well as medical students in their final year of training who are studying in Wales. We've got a lot of information on our webpage that is being updated regularly, so there's more and more information appearing on it. So a lot of the FAQs that we get are dealt with there, either in the materials or in the FAQ section right at the end. But if you do have any questions after that point, then feel free to use the WhatsApp and contact us, and we'll try and answer it as quickly as we can. Or you can use that generic email address that we've got there if you can't find the answer to your question. Only BMA members get to have a vote in this contract referendum, and so you've got until the 9th of December to join if you do want to have a say on the contract if you're not already a member. And that's it. Diolch yn fawr. And I'm going to hand over to Thomas to go through some of the questions that we've had.
Lovely, thank you, Dan. So we've had some questions submitted via the Q&A, which I am just going to try and technologically go across the screen. So the first question here is, please could you include worked examples of take-home pay at 80% less than full-time if possible, and how much of this is estimated to be the GP supplement to replace banding? So Dan, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously this was pre-submitted, so we did go through a 60% example, which I hope gave a rough idea. But we're going to put up detailed pay journeys that go through a different range of scenarios, and some of those will include GP registrars. So hopefully they're kind of you've already got a sense, or you certainly will get a sense before voting time. But if there's anything specific that you did want to know in that regard, then just please get in touch via the WhatsApp.
Lovely, thank you. Got a question here. Will CogPed guidance also become contractual for those on the 2002 contract during the transition? I think if I ask Kingsley to come in to answer that one, please. If you could introduce yourself, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Tom. Hi everyone. My name is Kingsley. I'm the BMA GP Registrar Committee Rep for Wales. So with regards to the cockpit guide being contractual, I think the short answer is no. For those on the 2002 contract, if they choose to remain on the 2002 contract, the corporate guide wouldn't be contractual on that would contract. It will be on the new one. Yeah.
Lovely. Fab. Thank you. Another question here. What would this contract mean for those of us on a higher pay scale than the basic entry salary? Also, is this optional? Dan, if I bring you in here, please.
Yeah. So again, hopefully it's been covered in slides, and continue to kind of use the Q&A to ask us more questions. But yeah, for this point, I wasn't quite sure what this meant. There's two things I think it could mean. The first is if you are coming from another training program or from between programs or etc., and you're higher up on the pay scale, what happens then? And again, if you built up incremental credits through that, then you claim it exactly as you do now. So you would just start up higher on the new pay scale, similar to how you would under the 2002 contract. So generally it should be quite comparable there, or you should be better off. The other thing we thought was whether this was just about one of those scenarios where people could end up less if they switched straight away, and we do see some of those with people very high up on the pay scale, depending on the circumstances and the rota in question. And as I explained in the transition slides, you would just stay on 2002, continue to uplift and increment as you go along. By August 2028, unless you were within 12 months of CCT, then you would be expected to transfer over unless certain criteria are met. But at the point you transfer over, you get that cash flow pay protection. So your pay cannot go down as a result of switching the contract. And given the length of GP training and the length of time we're talking about for all of this, we wouldn't really expect many people to require that anyway.
Fab. And I think there's one more question here, which I believe slide 26 may be helpful to answer this. We haven't got the slides open, but it is regarding unsafe working hours with relation to exception reporting. So the question is specifically asking if this is for hours above 48 hours, and thinking particularly in hospital that 48 hours may be, more people tend to work 48-hour rotas in hospital. Will this then make it easier to exception report in those instances? So this slide is explaining the limit on working hours. Some of these are, as Dan alluded to earlier, less relevant in general practice, given shifts don't tend to be longer than 13 hours. The weekend frequency tends to be less, less of an issue whilst on a general practice rotation. But if these are exceeded, then that would be an exception report to go in via the exception reporting tool. That is a separate element to the overtime, which is over your 40-hour week, which gets submitted as an overtime report, so separate to the exception report.
Yeah, and just in terms of the question as well, looking at it, so it's not working above 48 hours. It's the 48 hour average and the like. So it shouldn't really be possible with the rostering software. But if it was, then you'd breach it. And some of these, if you breach them, it means that there's a fine straight away. And it's just to say that again, this is different to the overtime system. So if you're rostered 40 hours a week as a GP registrar, for example, and you end up going over that because it's busy or because of service pressure and the like, then you'll just be you won't have to exception report that. You'll just be able to put in an overtime claim, and that will get paid out in the next payroll cycle.
But yeah, so it's not 48 hours in one week will trigger it necessarily. It would be 72 hours in any week period, but 48 hours over the average of the rota. Yeah. Fab. I can't see any other questions. Let me just scroll back. No, I believe that is all the questions either pre-submitted or on the night. I'm just checking WhatsApp as well. I think that's all from this end.
Great. Well, diolch yn fawr, everyone. We hope that was useful, and that we've been able to cater that a bit to some of the GP registrar aspects. But if you do have any outstanding questions, or there's something that you just comes to mind later, then do just check out our web pages or contact us via email or use our WhatsApp community. And thanks very much. That's my time.
That's that. Thank you all.